Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors at 𝐂𝐤 Church, and I'm here with my buddy, my pal, my partner in crime, Pastor Jon. How you doing, Pastor Jon?
Good. It's Monday as always, but I didn't preach yesterday, so I'm not totally wiped out. How are you?
I'm doing good. I slept in past my normal wake up time today. I was like, I'm wiped because we had life group last night too. So
are you serious?
So it's almost, our life group is almost always on the last Sunday of the month. That's just kind of how it's worked with our life group.
Oh,
and so it's like, it's kind of a joke that like it's awkward. Like everybody's discussing the sermon. It's the one the one you preach. The guy who preached it's here. I don't know why it's not that awkward, but I always think maybe it's awkward for other people. We are. I slept in today. I usually get up at like 5 and exercise, and I woke up at like 7:45. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. You needed that.
Yeah.
Yesterday was a unique day for us.
Yes, it was.
Our church.
Yeah, you want to share something about that?
Yeah, we baptized some babies. Baptized your youngest boy.
That's right. Yep.
Yesterday,
Knox got baptized.
And four other kids. So it was all the work we've been doing about unity and baptism and understanding the pedo position and honoring that and deferring to the heads of households. All of that talk came to fruition yesterday, and we baptized 5 little ones, which is pretty rad. I've never done that before ever in my life. And it's kind of interesting to be 48 and to do something like that for the first time, because it's like done a lot of baptisms, and so it's like, you're just kind of used to that. But I mean, it was pretty wild. Got pretty choked up, and pretty special day.
It was a special day. It was, even if you, and I know that this happened in our church, even if you hold strongly to the creative position, it was done in such a way that was, one, honored not just the pedo position, but also the creative position. And it was, I don't know. The feedback was that it was beautifully done, even if they don't agree with it.
That in and of itself is a beautiful thing.
It is, yeah.
Really
and it's funny. I often look at my bookshelves. I'm like, man, how many of these guys were pedo Baptists? And then there's a mixture of Baptists. And it's like, if they can stand on the same shelf, maybe they should be able to go to the same church together.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
So I'll drink to that.
Yeah. Cheers. My big old water here.
Cheers. You got water. I have a little bit of that
special
brandy.
Water?
The brandy that was given to us.
Oh, cool. All right.
Not the stuff you made. That was good too.
The other one. Yeah, that one with the Viking hammer attached to the neck.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
Amos.
Yeah, so we're looking at we started a new series through the book of Amos, Minor Prophet. Beginning of January, actually, and so we're at the end, towards the end of January. So it feels like we've been in Amos for a little bit. We also had Sanctity of Life in the middle of that as well, which, by the way, felt very fitting in light of we did some baby dedications that day, and we also, it was very fitting in light of some of the stuff going on in Amos as well. I think you taught the following week on the crimes of one of the nations that ripped open
the Ammonites.
The Ammonites ripping open the wombs of the pregnant women for the sake of conquest. So it's interesting how you treat little ones in the womb is related to often related to something political, even in the Bible. So but I wanted to just ask the question, because anytime you start a new series, there's in a new book of the Bible, there's some decision making that goes into that process. And so I wanted to ask you, what was the call, or what was the reason for wanting to open up Amos today for the church?
For the church, just randomly picked it out of a hat. It's a bunch of no. Okay, so I'm going to say it's kind of in a backwards way. One of the last things that the previous administration did before exiting office was issued out a bunch of pardons to people who had not been charged with anything. And nothing reeks of corruption, like handing out pardons to people who have not committed a crime. And it was widespread. It was family members. It was Fauci. It was lots of people. And what that signaled was rampant corruption. Okay.
Yeah.
So that just happened, what, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So
preemptive pardons.
Preemptive pardons. Yeah. Yeah. So in the spring of 2024, I was just thinking about anybody I think who's been paying attention has been seeing widespread corruption at every level. And it's not just one political party. It's across the board. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And thinking about what do you do, right? When you have massive corruption, you have injustices, you have people being trampled, you have no respect for the law, no respect for human life, no honoring of basic distinctions like male and female. And what happens when this is not just in the world, but it's also in the church? And so that was kind of like the landscape as you're looking at it and going, what do you do? And I'm thinking, Amos. This is exactly what Amos is all about. It's about God confronting corruption across the board, everywhere. Yeah. And it's these kinds of corruption. It's political corruption, treaties, covenants between nations. It's religious in terms of which we'll get into in the next episode, which is the sermon that you preached on, when it's dealing with Judah and Israel and their sins. It's economic. It's manipulating things. It's the suffering of the poor. It's about the dignity of human life being transgressed by these pregnant women who, it's like all the things that are happening right now felt like they were front and center with Amos, and Amos goes after it in a condensed fashion. So it's not like in Ezekiel where you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of chapters. Amos is just bam, here you go, fire. So
straight to the point.
Straight to the point. So back in the spring, I'm just like, gosh, there's so much craziness going on. And there were a number of things that were happening that you're watching going, I can't believe this is happening, but it is happening. And like, what do you do? And so Amos just seemed like a no-brainer in the sense that it just goes after all this stuff in a very condensed fashion. I was like, we're going to do it because I think people maybe are feeling similar to the way people were feeling in Amos's day. So
I think
that was the idea behind it.
One of the things that you mentioned, I think in the first sermon on I think it was like the first 15 verses or something like that of Amos, was that there is a tendency in the church to think of, and this kind of gets into one of the questions we're going to dig into a little bit later, but there's a tendency in the church to think the Bible's for the church, right? Yeah. God doesn't have a word for those outside of the church, other than come to Christ, right? But we don't see that in Amos. We see a very clear initial swift, swift sprint of judgments to the point about all these nations all around Israel. Yep. And I think that's a good clarifier, because I think that there's that tendency to think that has also made its way into the church's witness, that we're not willing to talk about stuff in the world that isn't directly under ecclesial authority, right? Yeah. And I think that is an important lesson to take in, and I think that I think that you and I have also probably experienced Christians, criticizing certain speech, right, that we might have about, and in the first sermon, I think you also mentioned, your interactions with local school boards, right? Yeah. And like when you do something like that, you come out to a local school board and you say, hey, this, kindergarten teacher or first grade teacher, whatever they are, dressing up as a woman and confusing kids about gender ideology is actually, an unjust thing, and it should be addressed, and it should be sanctioned. And that is met. Some Christians think you're crossing a line there, and and you can just go to Amos and be like, wait a minute, what about Amos?
That meeting, while you were saying that, I was like, there was at that meeting and other meetings, there was at least one pastor there who was protesting. I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, people who think that that they shouldn't be talking about things outside of our lane. Right.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it's more than that. It's not that you shouldn't be, it's that it's wrong to talk about things out your lane. And I think ever since 2020, something happened. I can't remember. And we started hearing stay in your lane, right? This is outside of your lane. And there is a sense in which as a pastor, right, you have a limited authority.
Yes.
It's a delegated authority from God. It's authority that is established and rooted in the word. We affirm sola scriptura, and we have authority and jurisdiction in the church. But that doesn't mean that you can't talk about anything outside of the church.
Yes.
I don't, we as a pastor, one of the things that you're entrusted to is to church discipline.
Yes.
Right. So that's exercised within the context of a covenant people.
Yes.
So you're not church disciplining people outside of the covenant. Like when Paul in Corinthians, it's like, I'm not saying disassociate with sexual immorality people of the world. Then you have to disconnect from everybody. So you do have a jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean that that things that are happening culturally in a community, in a country or whatever, that God's word has nothing to say to that, or that God's people have nothing to say to that.
Yep.
Because in Amos is case in point, where Amos is talking to the whole world. Well, why is Amos talking to the whole world? Because the lion is roaring. God actually has something to say to the whole world. And that's so contrary to what you're saying. Like mainline evangelicalism is like, no, don't. The Bible has nothing to say to the word. In fact, I remember reading in Martin Lloyd-Jones, who I think we both really appreciate.
Yeah.
Like he was like, the word of God has nothing to say to the world except come to Christ. And I'm like, well, what about Amos?
Yeah.
God had something to say to the world, and the world is invited to come to Christ, but one of the things that you clearly see in the book of Amos, which we'll get into, is God expects righteousness from the nations.
Yes. Yep. So that's an excellent summary of some of the reasons why Amos is so helpful to our controversies today. Yeah. I wanted to ask another question, which is maybe it's more of a sub element of Amos, but I think it's really important, and I think you'd agree. One of the things you've called Amos is the blue collar prophet. Yeah. And I think that you make your case for that in the first sermon, and speaking about what Amos was, he was like wasn't he a tender of fig trees or something, like a certain kind of fig tree that was like
sycamore figs, and a shepherd of Tekoa. Yeah. So he's and that was part of the reason for picking Amos too, because we have a very blue collar church. We have a very blue collar community. One of the largest employers is the shipyard, and that's a lot of blue collar work. And so typically I think blue collar guys can tend to look down on themselves and go, I don't have this degree, or I don't have this kind of a job, and so what's God going to do through me? And maybe I'm not important. And Amos is just, again, it turns that completely upside down, because Amos is a relatively poor farmer. To be a sycamore fig farmer is like the low end of the spectrum. Yeah. He doesn't own all this stuff. He's tending it for somebody else. He is just a regular blue collar guy. And yet he's the guy that God is using to call out this evil and this injustice that's around him. And so part of the hope is like, you want to encourage Christians in your community, and specifically Christians in your congregation, to start speaking up, to know that God uses ordinary people all the time. And Amos is one example of him using a blue collar guy to call people to repentance and to confront all sorts of evil and corruption that was surrounding him. And speaking up is a massive part of confronting that and changing it. So
Why do you? There's a you kind of hinted at this a little bit, but why do you think it is that we tend to think only the people with degrees should speak out about these things? What's going on there? Because I think that there's something insidious there that is kind of I think the Bible contradicts us in so many ways, because you even have Jesus picks a bunch of fishermen, right? So for his disciples. So
he was a carpenter, right?
And maybe also, what is it about the people with degrees? And I think it's really important to really kind of qualify this. Like, God uses people like Isaiah too. Like, Isaiah is a pretty he's known to be kind of like a really well written prophet, right? But so you can't just say, oh, like God doesn't use the guy with a degree, but at the same time, you need to make sure you're not creating an environment where the guy with the degree is the only person who has credibility to speak out about stuff, right? And I think that that's happened. I think that is kind of what is maybe what, like, I think we see that today. So I'm curious, like, what is it about that the environment where only the experts can talk and only the degree and the PhDs can talk about stuff? What does Amos, being a blue collar prophet, tell us about, or how does it encourage the blue collar guy who's like, no, like I don't have that thing, but I still see because I read God's word. I love that you mentioned, like, we need more guys in 𝐤𝐸𝐴𝐵 who have like really worn out Bibles and like dirty hands from working on projects, like both, those, that kind of like, call to, like, just because you're a blue collar guy doesn't mean you can't know God's word and see what's going on. So what is it about that? Like, what's the lie there that we need to kind of like, tear down?
Yeah. Well, I think like what you said was really important, because you can take the lie two different directions. You can take it, God only likes and works through blue collar people, and highly educated white collar folks are the devil, right? That's clearly not the case. And you can cite, I mean, you've got Psalms written by who? Well, a lot of it's coming from a king. Like, that's not, David's not a blue collar guy. Like, he was a shepherd, but I mean, he was a king, right?
Yeah.
So and you see that throughout the scriptures. Like, you've got fishermen, but then you have Paul. Paul is a highly educated,
obviously,
right? He would be on the elite side. So, I think the best thing to say is that God just doesn't really care about any of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't qualify you. It doesn't disqualify you.
Yeah.
He's as happy to use a king as he is to use a carpenter, as he is to use a philosopher, as he is to use a shepherd, right? It has nothing to do with it. I think you have to clarify that up front.
Yep.
I do think, culturally, if you travel to a small town, specifically like an agriculturally based small town, you are inevitably going to find less of the crazy ideology prevalent.
It's true. Yep.
So 2 summers ago, my wife and I traveled kind of to the eastern side of Oregon for a wedding, to this cute little town. And it was like, I pulled in there. I was like, oh gosh, I want to move here. I want to live here. This is amazing. We walked through it's one of those towns you can walk, one side to the other. And at that time it was in the summer. So over here, you've got pride flags and stuff, everywhere. And over there was nothing. Yeah. It like almost didn't exist. And there's a reason for that, is that crazy ideologies don't work in an agriculturally based society. You need a male and a female cow to mate, to have offspring for, like, you can't live in that world. And so people tend to be grounded in some very fundamental truths they're realities. You can't escape that, because if you try to incorporate that ideology, your farm's going to fall apart. So there's something about earthy people in that sense, that they're grounded to reality in a way that can be harder to find or harder to acquire if you're living in a tech city where everything's the mind and it's just ideas. And do you know what I mean? So
I think about the difference between like a college town and then like, just go a little bit, in any direction when you hit something a little more small. And you can see, a college town has, because it's so much, especially in our day and age where the college towns are colleges based around colleges that are teaching a lot of like, they are teaching ideologies, right? They're teaching different secular views of the world. They're embracing relativism. So those college towns that are like highly elite are not just elite in the sense of being, like uppity, but also like they're peddling ideologies and ways of thinking about the world that are just very contrary to nature. So like there's a timing thing happening as well in terms of where you are culturally that I think results in what we're seeing today. Like the college towns are often embracing the ideologies of the day. And then if you look at like states, across the board, it's like the Bible Belt states where this is not the common thing. But then if you go to just the college towns in those states, you start to see it. So
you find it. Yeah.
And so it's very, I think, one of the things I think that I think we were talking about this a little bit before we hit record, but, the people of the, that are in the soil, as it were, the earthy people who are like having to deal with reality on a lot, on a day in, day out basis, they also don't have time for all of the, crazy qualifications that are made to justify a lot of different views. And so there's a kind of like, they tend to be more to the point, like it's common sense,
Mm-hmm.
And when I say common sense, I mean in the highest manner possible, like to live in light, to live with the grain of how God has made things, right? Is what I would call a biblical understanding of common sense. And so there's the blue collar guy is like, doesn't want to live, doesn't like just traffic in those ideas of relativism and, everything's kind of like, qualified or, like there's all these different things you have to work with to make your point. It's like they're like, there's one way to thread or to put that nut on that bolt. It goes, one way tightens the thread, the other way loosens it. It's like, or, there's a certain tool for a job and don't try to use the wrong tool. Like there's a comfortable, they're comfortable with reality. And so they kind of, it seems like there's an application of that to truth. And I think that's actually needed today, because right now we're living in a time where like gender and sex are like somehow two different things, and we can talk about one thing and have to really qualify it. So like, oh no, gender is like a social construct and sex is a biological one. But then when we talk about like, affirming gender, what are we talking about? We're talking about doing something biological. Like it's so it's so nebulous, right? And I think that like this common sense guy goes, well, if you're born with if you're born with something in your pants, it tells you what you are, right? It's like,
it sounds
just
pretty
like,
oppressive to me.
It sounds pretty commonsensical, right? But the life of the mind in our culture has become so convoluted by all these different things that common sense is just not even allowed.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, I mean, they kind of feed into each other. I think that we have been taught to idolize education.
Yes. Yep.
And education used to exist to educate.
Yeah.
and then education became, no, this is what you have to do to get a job.
Yeah.
And now education is primarily indoctrination, right? So you get indoctrinated. So it's but I mean, I grew up, I don't know if you felt this, but I grew up feeling like if you didn't go to college, you were a failure.
Oh yeah.
And there was no objective evidence to prove that. It was just like, right, you idolize. And so with that comes, well, I guess if you've got a bunch of degrees, you must know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And since I don't, I must not know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know? And so enter Amos. No degrees.
Yep.
No pedigree.
Just
nothing.
Shooting straight.
Yeah. Working on trees and following the sheep around. And yet here's a guy who has wisdom, who understands the way things actually are. And one of the things that I was emphasizing is like Amos has something to say. And I think it's really important. I think I said this earlier, but it's really important. People have something to say, and you might not have the fanciest job. You might not have a degree at all. But if you know the truth, you have something to say, and people need to start saying it.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
That's a little bit of the background.
That's good. So the last question I wanted to dig into was kind of a big theme of the whole chapter, and we touched on it a little bit, but it's this notion that the Lord is the judge of all. We talked about this by saying, it's really common for people to say, stick to your lane. Apparently God only has a word for his people, but no, Amos is really clearly going after all these pagan nations around him, the ones that are, did not receive the covenant, did not receive the law of the covenant, and yet they're being judged by God's standards, which are revealed in that covenant. So that maybe you could touch on that a little bit, and we can dig a little bit into the question of, how does that work? Like, how can these people who have not received this written law that Israel did be judged by the same God, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing I want to say is like, I think that Amos, reading Amos can be a little bit like stepping into a cold bath, right? And that it shocks your senses. Yeah. Because I think that most people imagine that God is like a domesticated God, right? He's tamed, and God just doesn't. He's not going to speak up about the conduct of nations because they don't claim to worship him, right? You hear this all the time. So why would I expect somebody who doesn't claim to follow God to act a particular way, right? And it's almost just a given that that's just the way it is, right? Yeah. And so we're kind of, we're used to thinking that God is silent regarding nations that don't believe in him, don't worship him. They have different gods. God's just kind of letting them do their own thing. And he's just concerned with his people. He's just concerned with the church. And then therefore the church should only be concerned with the church and not, right? So there's a little bit of a shock when you get to Amos, because that's not the way it is at all. And Amos is not like nuanced and soft. And here's we're going to gradually introduce you to the God who is the judge of all. Like the first thing he says is, the Lord roars from Zion. Yeah. That's the first prophetic. You have the introduction about who Amos is in verse 1. Yeah. The first word that is said to the nations is that God is roaring, right? From Zion. Yeah. That turns everything kind of upside down. And then you have Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, the Ammonites, Moab, and then the last two being Judah and Israel, right? Which is the next episode that you'll get to talk about. But God is absolutely holding the nations accountable. Now, he's not holding them accountable in the same way that he holds Israel accountable. And the reason for that, which I'm actually going to be preaching on this week, is Israel is God's elect. And they entered into a unique covenant with God that set them apart. And so they are judged on the particulars of that covenant. God is not judging the other nations on the particulars of that covenant, but he is absolutely judging them on what you might call basic standards of righteousness, which have to do with the way that they treat people.
Yes, it is. Right? Yeah.
God expects these, and these are like powers. These are governments. These are militaries. God is expecting these nations, even though they don't worship him, they're not loyal to him. He is expecting them to act in a manner that is just and in a way that upholds basic human dignity. And the reason for that is, I think I quoted, it was James Boyce Montgomery, is like, God doesn't hold them accountable for not doing what they didn't know to do. He holds them accountable for not doing what they very well knew they were supposed to do. Yeah. Right. They know. Yeah. All of humanity knows. Paul gets into this in Romans, where he's talking about we suppress the truth. It's not that we don't know the truth. Oh, who knew?
Yeah.
No, we do know the truth. We're made in God's image. We have this moral compass. We know that there's a difference between right and wrong. We understand these things. We know that there's a basic way that we are to treat others. It's part of being made in God's image. And yes, we have sinned, and yes, we have fallen, and yes, we believe in total depravity, meaning that sin has affected every part of our being. We believe in the noetic effects of sin, but we don't believe that the image of God has completely been destroyed in people. There's still an awareness of the existence of God, of his attributes, and a basic understanding of right and wrong. And God, therefore, is holding these nations and these leaders and these rulers accountable and responsible for neglecting what they knew to be the right and the good, by virtue of being image bearers.
Yep. Romans 1 talks about how, God's invisible attributes are clear to them, right? And because of that, they have no excuse. And so that's the people talk about this as God's revealed character in nature or in even our conscience, right? So there's and we see those things explicitly in how people treat one another. And I think that the things you see in the nations that he explicitly goes after have to do with breaking treaties, going after your brother, enslaving peoples, threshing with an iron thresher. I don't know what remember the word. Yeah, threshing with with iron, right?
Yeah, sledges of iron.
Sledges of iron, meaning, and within that is like you were cruelly. I think there's also theft involved there, because threshing means you're taking the fruit of something. So it's a cruel form of warring, a cruel form of taking from another people for yourself. And then you have, in Moab, which will, is in the next chapter, but we can touch on that briefly. Like, there's an interesting thing in Moab where Moab's judged for burning the bones of an Edomite king. And, when I first read that, I thought, that's just kind of weird. Like, why are we going after, like, the guy's already dead? Why is it so bad, like, the God's going to judge the nation because they burned the bones of this king? Well, if they're burning the bones of this king, what are they doing? Well, they are disrespecting, and they are, desecrating a human body, body, which is, the climax of God's creation is man. And so you're not disrespecting just this dead guy. He's already dead, right? Yeah. You're actually disrespecting the creator who made his body and his bones. So there's like there's a it's even irrational to do that. Right.
Yeah. There's almost a sense of like you're aspiring to be God yourself by judging somebody after death.
Yes. That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of weird. It's like, oh, we're going to get you again. It's like, no, you don't get to do that. That's not. How this works.
That's not you. You're not God. So and I think that this is helpful, because I think that as you engage with people who are not believers, like, you're engaging with them knowing that they know right and wrong. They are actively suppressing it, right? Yes. And so that's when you go to a school board and you're talking to people about whether a teacher should be confusing kids about gender, it's like you've created this whole ideology to justify this, but this is completely contrary to this common sense that even the Bible seems to acknowledge, right? Yeah. In your conscience, a boy is not a girl. And you, in fact, reveal this by the fact that you think that a boy who feels like a girl should have something biological done to them to make them more like a girl. And it's it's insanity. But God is going to judge based on his standards, and his standards are revealed in his word, but also in how he made stuff and how he made the world. And I find that increasingly more important as the world rejects reality, and all the immoral behaviors seem to be stemming from a rejection of reality. you see this in the LGBTQ stuff. You see this in even just notions of justice, like, where it was right to say a man should be judged by his character, not the color of his skin. That's right. That's good. That we're getting back to reality here. Like, there should be a law that is objective, that is applied to everyone. But then you take that in the other direction, and now you say a person's skin and all their history behind the people that happen to have that same skin should be taken into account on whether or not this person is judged according to the law, right? And we're gonna, like, make complete just appropriate the law very differently for one person versus another person. You are acting so contrary to common sense and what laws are for and what people are, and it's very, very damaging to a people, because then all of a sudden you lose all trust in anything that is your government is doing, right? It's a spiraling fall into insanity.
And there's no objective standard for the scales, because the scales can always move based on whatever standard
emotions
they want to have. Yeah.
So the last thing I just want to ask, and I want you to just kind of touch on this, and then we can wrap it up. The three, for 3 transgressions and 4, right? Yeah. Interesting language that is used in each one of the prophetic, pronouncements against the nations and Israel and Judah. What does that phrase mean? What's going on behind that phrase?
So when Moses, that's what you made that mistake on Sunday too.
Amos and Moses sound very similar. Yes, they do.
Yeah, just one letter off or so.
So when Amos says for 3 and for 4, it's his way of saying this is a long established pattern of behavior. God does not have a quick trigger finger. It's not that somebody screws up and immediately God pounces in judgment to wipe everybody out. That's not what's happening. God is he's patient and he's long suffering, but he's also a God of justice.
Yeah,
and those things are working together. And there comes a point when God says no more.
Yep.
And so what Amos is establishing is the fact that God has been patient.
Yeah.
And he has been merciful. And the sins that he is bringing judgment for are long established, ingrained patterns of wicked behavior that now have gotten to a point where God must judge.
Yep.
And I think that people want to take one of those, right?
Yeah.
And they say, like, I just had somebody online saying, well, God is merciful. And I wanted to say, do you think that we should open all the prisons? Right? Because somebody go, well, God is merciful. Nobody's held accountable for anything. Like, no, that would be insane. Yes, God is merciful. And then you've got other people who are like, just bring fire, right? Just judge it all right now. It's like, no, God is patient. So yes, he is merciful. Yes, he is just. He's also patient. And what's happening in Amos's day is that things have gone on for a long time. These are, again, established patterns of injustice and cruelty to people. And it has gotten to the point where God says no more. So yes, he's just. Yes, he's merciful. Yes, he's patient. But those do not exclude each other.
Yeah. And his patience only underscores the fact that his judgment is measured and just. Like, it's, I think a lot of people read, like, I'm going to send fire on your walls. Your people are going to scatter and perish. The kings are going to get wiped out. And they think, whoa, like, that seems like the pot just boiled over all of a sudden, right? But it's very measured. God is, even just, it's interesting when I read the Moab judgment, they burned with fire the bones of the king of Edom, but then it's like, and I'm going to burn your walls. I'm going to burn. It's like we see this in Exodus too, with the particular plagues, how much they're measured to fit the crime and to speak clearly about what God is addressing. And I think that that's an important thing to take in and to realize, like, none of God's judgments are over the top. They are, and if anything else, his patience teaches us that he's even, measured to a point where he's being merciful, right? In his judgments, that we should realize just how measured he's being.
Yeah. And I don't want to go on a rabbit trail here, but as I was preaching through and thinking about the things that are listed in Amos 1, because it's pretty terrible, right?
Yeah.
Some people might resist to God's judgment, but you have to think about, what did God's patience mean? Mm-hmm. Because people were genuinely suffering under these things. And I think that if you're talking about the difficulty of defending and explaining something, it's harder to defend and explain the patience.
Yes. Yeah.
Because God withholding judgment means that these acts of injustice continue.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's hard. They don't go on forever, but they do. It does happen. And like, that's hard.
Yep. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I'm looking forward to more discussions on Amos. Hope you guys are too. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
See ya.